Greetings and salutations, my name is OJ as always, and welcome back to another video in the DBDathon series of videos, a series of videos where I go over every single killer in the game from Trapper all the way up to the now not so recently released Springtrap. I cover their lore, aka just reading their in-game bio, their power / gameplay, their teachable perks, as well as their design and my favourite / least favourite cosmetics for them. And with that said, we move on to our object of obsession for today, that being Talbot Grimes, also known as the Blight. Now, as I do with every single one of these videos, I'd like to start off by reading his in-game bio, as I am, to no one's surprise, not a lore guy. If you're looking for videos on lore, I'd suggest watching someone like Pixelbush, who makes some, really good videos on the lore of DeadByDaylight. But, with that said, I'd like to read off his in-game bio. To understand the human condition, one must rise above it. This was the credo of Talbot Grimes, a Scottish chemist whose unrestrained ambition took him to towering heights. As a boy, he was a popular child, bright, charismatic, and unafraid to challenge authority. Yet, despite his social graces, he was fiercely independent, spending much of his time exploring the sprawling fields near his town alone. What began as a child's curiosity nearly turned deadly after experimenting with a patch of poisonous foxglove. For days he laid in bed, dripping with sweat, purging any food that touched his stomach. When he recovered, it wasn't fear that gripped him, but fascination. There was something magical in how a single flower could so drastically affect him. Into his adult years, his ambition developed as quickly as his questionable methods. He attended the London School of Medicine and excelled despite several reprimands. His willingness to push the limits secured him a position with the British East India Company, and within 7 years he was made head chemist. In time, he completed one of his greatest achievements, a chemical that could increase a worker's productivity whilst reducing their need for rest. He was rewarded with a secret laboratory beneath a prison camp on Dyer Island. There, off the coast of India, prisoners from the Opium War became his unwilling subjects, leading to a drug that allowed soldiers to withstand incredible amounts of pain. Though most side effects were minor, there were rumours that a small number of soldiers went mad. In feral states, they massacred villages, impaling the populace on bayonets, leaving them hanging from trees. There were no official reports on the subject, and Talbot refused to blame himself for what could only be exaggerated war stories. Though his callous brilliance seemed unflappable, he was ignorant to the enemies his questionable work had amassed. The realization struck him quite literally, with a steel pipe to the back of his head during a trip in Mangalore. He was bound and loaded into a wagon. When his blindfold was removed, a sickly man showed him a mass grave, filled with hundreds of bodies. Unbeknownst to Talbot, his productivity-increasing drug had killed nearly an entire factory's worth of workers. He knew he couldn't defend himself against the anger and accusations of his abductor. All he could do was curl up as the blows from the steel pipe rained down. His body was thrown into the grave and left for dead. Shifting between consciousness and the darkest black, he crawled for an escape. Fingers sinking into rotting flesh. Black flies feasted on his uncovered skin. The sensation of 100 pinpricks stabbing into him. As he collapsed, he came face to face with a dead woman's dazzling hazel eyes. Too weak to pull away, he could do nothing but witness his life's work. Then, from the edge of death, he was brought back. He found himself on a small bed as a kindly, wrinkled face looked over him. With each pained breath, he was nursed back to health in an ancient mystery school posing as a monastery. In verdant gardens, behind a tall, unassuming wall, monks studied forbidden texts, striving to expand the human mind in the search for other dimensions, believing one to be connected to the other. Talbot's knowledge proved indispensable, his mind-altering chemicals integrating seamlessly with theories of neural expansion. He realized then that his salvation was no coincidence. He was plucked from the pit specifically to advance the school's knowledge. He agreed to help until his recovery was complete, being tasked with researching what the monks called the soul chemical, a compound derived from the pineal gland that could open the mind's eye. What began as a favour to his saviours soon became an obsession. Poring over the school's archives of lost texts, he uncovered scientific formulas that confirmed previously unthinkable ideas. He dreamt of ushering humankind into a new period of enlightenment. Perhaps then, the nightmare of hundreds of dead factory workers and of those two hazel eyes would fade from his mind. As he came closer to a breakthrough, the demeanour of the monks shifted. The gentle smiles they offered were paired with uneasy eyes that quickly darted away when spotted. The polite conversations he was once privy to turned to hushed murmurs. The last thing he would see of the school was the cracked ceiling above his bed, branching like dendrite through plaster. His next memories were a shattered mosaic of images and sensations. Smearing lights, horse hoofs on cobblestone, coarse burlap scratching at his cheeks, sharp bites into his arm. He awoke ragged and unwashed, splayed on the straw mattress of an opium den. Mind in a dense fog, his first thoughts was of his notes, the only record of his groundbreaking revelations. He searched frantically, scrambling through the dingy basement, pleading aloud for help. The few other denizens looked up from their hammocks, offering nothing but drug-soaked eyes and apathetic gazes that soon fell to half-slumber. Before he noticed, the robed figure appeared behind him. A needle plunged into his arm, and the world disappeared once more. Awoken again, each time hazier than the last. He tongued at hollow gaps between his teeth. How long, he wondered. A faint memory returned. The soul chemical. His notes. The verge of a breakthrough, a faraway whisper, entered his mind. He fumbled with a stone, sharpening it with shaking hands. In the dim light of the den, amongst the catonic occupants, he carved his research from memory into the walls. He wrote for hours until his fingers bled, moving to the floor, taking in everything the voice whispered, despite his inability to comprehend it. When there was nothing left to write, he gripped the stone and carved the message into his chest. Stained with blood, he witnessed a miracle appear before him. A magnificent field of lush orange flowers. The whispered voice beckoned to him, urging him to enter the field and discover worlds and dimensions beyond human comprehension. For a moment, Talbot felt the sense of wonder he possessed as a child. The denizens of the opium den awoke to silence, the dry scent of smoke still lingering in the air. Shambling out of their drug-hazed fog, they found the stone floor wet with blood, tiny rivets coursing through the cracks. As eyes adjusted to the darkened room, the jagged lettering scrawled along its length began to appear. Written over and over without end, there was one single line. Death is only the beginning. Now, the Blight has a very, very extensive lore and history dating back all the way to when the first set of Blighted skins came out to the game in Halloween of 2018. So, for this video specifically, if you are interested in his very extensive lore, I would highly suggest seeking out other content creators for more in-depth coverage, because genuinely, he has a lot of lore, like a lot. I think he had like 2 tomes dedicated to him. I think it was 3 tomes. Like, he is that involved in Dead by Daylight that he needed 3 tomes, his own in-game bio. Like, he had a lot leading up to his eventual release. But reading the bio alone, it's just fantastic. It is a man obsessed with science and development and all of this, to the point that he's experimenting on people unwillingly in the middle of, you know, a drug war. So for him to then end up in the same scenario as the people he had tested on is just irony at its finest. It is cruel irony at its finest, but deserved. Talbot Grimes, from, you know, reading his in-game bio, is not a good person. But it also calls back to one of my favourite English literature pieces, or if you want to be more specific, Scottish literature pieces of all time, that being Jekyll and Hyde, a fantastic story of you know, like it is a big massive analogy for drug addiction, specifically to cocaine. And well, there's a lot of clear similarities in Talbot Grimes' story to the Jekyll and Hyde story, just from the fact that, you know, even just the small fact that he's Scottish, and like he's a Scottish medical student, the same as Dr. Jekyll, before his eventual transformation later due to a resource that transforms him into Mr. Hyde. The same kind of goes for the Blight. He was Talbot Grimes, a renowned scientist or medical student, and etc. And then, come his entrance into the realm, he consumes the plant. Well, he doesn't necessarily consume it, but you know what I mean. Like, he uses the plants that cause the blighted status to the point that he becomes the Blight. He becomes the monsters that he's been turning other killers into through their blighted skins. It's a fantastic callback to a genuinely fantastic story that I have a lot of love for, though I don't fully understand it. I read it in like English, like in like high school. I read it in English, and it was a miserable experience because we overanalyzed it to hell and back, but we never focused on the fact that the entire story was a metaphor for drug addiction in a sense. It was mind-boggling to me then, and it is even more mind-boggling to me now. But genuinely, the Blight's lore, along with his connection to Jekyll and Hyde, is fantastic. I would highly suggest anyone watching this and listening to me blabber on to go check out the rest of his lore. Either read it yourself or watch a video of someone else reading it, because it is fantastic, and I cannot sing its praises high enough. The Blight is, as you can probably tell, one of my favourite killers in the game, just from a aesthetic lore standpoint. So, but anyways, with that said, let's move on to something not related to aesthetics or lore, that being his gameplay and his power. Now, the Blight's power, on paper, is relatively simple, and, as I'm sure many of you do know, very, very strong. It is known as the Blighted Corruption, which allows him, at the start of a trial, to have 5 tokens. And, by using the power button, he is able to rush forward at a high speed. Upon colliding with a wall, he can then rush again, and then again and again, until either he hits someone with the lunge, or he, you know, runs out of tokens. Once he runs out of tokens, he'll enter a fatigued state where he injects himself again, and then you have to wait for all 5 charges to build up once more. Yeah, he's the second strongest killer in the game. I still think, to this day, even with the Ghoul and his shenanigans, obviously when Ghoul was on PTB, he was the second strongest, but yeah, now, as of current, after his like 17 nerfs, the Blight, not 17 nerfs to the Blight, I mean to the Ghoul, the Blight is still the second strongest killer in the game, in my humble opinion. However, that is not the reason I really like him. As I said, I really like his lore and aesthetics, but the Blight being ridiculously strong, almost, it's always been a weird thing, right? Whenever people talk about the Blight, it's always about how strong he is, how overbearingly powerful he is as a killer. And yes, he is overbearingly powerful. He's not as bad as a nurse, you know, Mrs. I can ignore the entire rules of this game, but he can kind of do that, but just in a less absurd sense, right? He is very strong, and he is quite fun to play. It's fun to kind of like ping pong yourself around, and sometimes when you get like a perfect lunge right round the corner, it just feels good to play as him. And, you know, I will give my props to the sound work for him as well. The screams he lets out and the growls when he's bumping into things is really, like, scary. It's intimidating, and I do enjoy him, and it's, you know, fun on the survivor's end to see like just ping-ponging around and flying across the map, right? But his strength and his power gameplay-wise almost takes away from his other qualities, because whenever people just talk about him, they talk about his strength. He talk about him as the second best killer in the game. It's very rare that whenever I see people talk about the Blight, they give props to his design, his lore. Like, I don't know if this is just like what I'm seeing, but whenever people talk about him, it's just, he's really, really strong. He's the second strongest killer in the game. Yes, he is. But I guess after a while, though, I guess you can only say so much about his lore and design. You can only sing its praises so much, right? Yeah, I can understand why people talk about his gameplay so much, but it's almost all I ever see anyone talk about, and it just kind of upsets me in a sense that a killer this good is just permanently just gameplay. It's just gameplay all the time. It's all I ever hear about. I wish people sung his praises. It's like the Ghoul, right? People just talk about how oppressive he is and how unfun he is to go against. Hey, can we talk about his aesthetics? Can we talk about anything else? Like, after a while, it just becomes repetitive, I suppose, to me. This just could be me blabbering into the void, right? I could be chatting complete shite, as some would put it. But in my opinion, as strong as he is and as fun as he is to play, when all you see is people talk about his gameplay, it becomes tiresome. But that could just be my opinion. I could be tripping. I could be speaking to a voice. Maybe I'm alone in this, right? But that's what these videos are for. They're my personal takes on killers and how I feel about them. So I guess that entire rant, blabbering, etc. is part of this series and what it kind of is about. But anyways, with his gameplay kinda discussed, I'd like to move on to his teachable perks. Now, thankfully, his perks, unlike, the majority of killers, I would say majority of killers, are good across the board. I know I've said that a few times recently, but hey ho, sometimes there's multiple killers in a row that just have good perks across the board. Ooh, my voice just went then. Anyways, his first perk is known as Dragon's Grip, with a description reading as such. After damaging a generator, for the next 30 seconds, the first survivor that interacts with it will scream, revealing their location for 4 seconds, and becoming afflicted with the exposed status effect for 60 seconds. Dragon's Grip has a cooldown of 60, 50, or 40 seconds, depending on perk level. Exposed survivors will be down by basic attacks, even if uninjured, and it has flavor text reading, "Such potential in this compound. Even the slightest trace causes unnatural effects." From the Journal of Talbot Grimes. This perk is very solid. It's pretty decent. It works especially good on any killer with, large map presence, because they can follow up on the 60 seconds they have to down a survivor once they touch the exposed generator. It was, I believe, recently buffed. It had its cooldowns shortened by like half, which is, that's pretty good. That's actually quite good for it. But it's a odd perk because some killers just can't use it, like, at all. Like, someone like the Trapper could not use this because he does not have the sort of mobility to follow up on, the exposed status effect. However, someone like Wraith, the guy right next to a Trapper in the killer lineup, is able to use this, mostly due to the fact that all of his damage comes from basic attacks, and he has the map movement to follow up on the exposed. It's a pretty good perk on a decent portion of the killers, and I'm relatively okay with it. I've never really been super big on it, because, I don't know, something about, I have to kick a gen, right? And usually if I'm doing a gen kicking build, I just want to regress it, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I don't really use the perk very often. I just can't really use it to its fullest effects, but that's a skill issue on my part, right? Anyways, with that said, we move on to his second perk. Said second perk is known as Hex Blood Favor, with a description reading as such. A hex that gains the entity's favor when blood is spilled. Injuring a survivor will call upon the entity to block pallets from being pulled down within a 24, 28, or 32 meter radius of the survivor location for 15 seconds. The hex effect persists as long as the related hex totem is standing, and it has flavor text reading. It would be no leap of the imagination to suggest that the trials are a biological response of sorts. Another entry from Talbot Grimes' journal. This perk recently has been getting a decent bit of attention thanks to, I believe, a tweet from Hens. I think that's who tweeted it. This perk is very strong. Very strong. On a flat level, like reading its description, it is very strong. It eliminates one of the survivor's only ways to escape chases in any form. However, although Hens' tweet does say, it kind of is overbearingly oppressive, really, really strong, blah, blah, blah. Here's the catch. What does the first line, or the first word in its name say? Can we read it for me? Hex. 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 What does that mean, guys? You can get rid of it. You can, once you know it exists, you will put your full attention on getting rid of it, because it is that oppressive. Obviously you have to be injured. The survivor needs to be injured before its effects kick in. However, once it kicks in, that's a down. That will almost always become a down, because they can't use pallets. That's insane. That's ridiculously strong. Unbearingly strong. However, to counteract that fact, it is a hex totem perk, as all hex totems should be. They should be overbearingly strong, because they have the negative of being able to be removed from the match, full stop. That is why it is a hex totem, and more importantly, why it's not been changed in about 4 years, which, you know, that's a long time, especially when it comes to buffs and nerfs in a game like this, right? Hex Blood Favor, as strong as it is a hex perk. You can get rid of it, and if you know it's in your game, sure, someone's going to get hooked because of it, right? At first. That's why you should put your full attention, either you, if you get hooked, or when you know the killer has it in some way, shape or form, into getting rid of it, as it is that oppressive. But with my rant, per se, done, I would like to move on to his third perk. Said third perk is known as Hex Undying, with description reading as such. While Hex Undying is active, survivors within 2, 3 or 4 meters of any dull totem have their aura revealed. When another Hex totem would be cleansed, that totem's Hex transfers to Hex Undying, deactivating Hex Undying. Any tokens that the transferred Hex had are transferred to Hex Undying as well. Now, they think they're real cheeky doing this. I just talked about Hex Blood Favor, right? How oppressive it is, how strong it is. Just get rid of it, right? Hex Undying it can kind of eliminate that fact. Hex Undying can take any Hex perk that is destroyed and basically let it live once more. Let it live through another Hex totem. It's very strong. If you're running a Hex build, it's this or Pentimento. You are doing one of the two. Hex builds live and die off of either Pentimento or Undying. And perk hexes like Blood Favor can be given second lives through this perk, making it by far one of the strongest perks in the game, especially of course on hex builds. So what do you do in a situation where you get rid of Blood Favor, but you realize they got Undying? Get rid of Undying! Get rid of it as well. I know it reveals auras of survivors within ranges of dull totems, but what does it not do? Reveal their aura near any thingy, active ones. So it doesn't actually affect the 2 totems you're trying to get rid of, alright? This perk is unbelievably strong. You have to run it with a hex perk for it to work, right? So no matter what you're doing, it's going to be strong. Like, I'm running Hex Ruin. Hex Undying will make sure that thing stays up for two goes. And even if they, cleanse Undying first, they still need to go cleanse Ruin, right? It's genuinely insane that they've released Blood Favor alongside Hex Undying, because that's a combo made in hell, right? But anyways, with that perk discussed, I'd like to move on to his design / my least favorite and most favorite cosmetics for him. Now, the Blight's base design is easily in my top 3 favorite designs in this game, like across original killers, licensed killers, easily, not even a challenge. It is a man draped in a cloak to cover the fact that he is no longer a man. He is a monster of his own creation. It is perfect visual storytelling. You can tell that at some point this was a man. He is dressed in relatively fancy clothes, judging from the way his shoes look and the way his trousers look. The cloak itself at some point must have been some sort of fancy British coat. The cane as a weapon is a perfect symbolism of the fact that this was once a human man. He probably used that cane to walk around, but not anymore. That cane is a weapon now. That cane is a weapon for a man turned into a mindless monster, a monster of his own creation, a monster he was always always destined to be, and his visual design, at least in his base design, portrays that to perfection. Lest I not mention his drooping, rotten face where the jaw is unhinged, just exposing the blight that seeps from his very being. It is perfect. It is a perfect original design for a killer. There is only, in my mind, one killer who tops it, but it shall not be named till its day is to come. But with that said, and my praises for the Blight high sung, I would like to move on to my favourite and least favourite cosmetics. Now, for those who need a refresher or don't know, when it comes to cosmetics and how I pick them, for least favourites I'm not allowed to pick anything below a very rare, because if I could, I'd just pick some terrible yellow recolour and call it a day, which is boring. And for favourites I can pick whatever the hell I want, because sometimes, who knows, maybe even a blue rarity skin is my favourite. Not usually the case. But with that said, my least favourite skin for the Blight is the Sophisticated Slaughter skin. Now, I actually don't really have any problems with the skin. It's really funny to me. Blight doesn't really have any bad skins, per se. This skin is a very clear and broad as daylight reference to Jekyll and Hyde. He is dressed in Victorian clothing. The top hat, the way the cane is shaped, it is all very much a big, massive reference to Jekyll and Hyde, which, as I mentioned earlier, is one of my favourite pieces of literature. And, you know, this isn't a bad skin, it's just my least favourite. This is a really great skin, actually, if you consider its reference to Jekyll and Hyde. It's just my least favourite for being a bit boring? I don't know, like, it's just not my favourite. It was this or the ice one, but even then I just like the ice spikes going through his body a little bit more than just the simple Victorian clothing. This isn't a bad skin at all. It's a great skin even, but it just so happens to be the one that I like the least. But with that said, we move on to my favourite skin. Before I speak of my favourite though, I must give a small shout out to the William Birkin skin, which is a fantastic sort of recreation of the character from Resident Evil 2's remake. It is a perfect fit for the Blight, though I personally do wish William had been a killer. I think he has the potential to be a killer of some form, but that's besides the point. With my favourite skin though, it is by far the true Blight skin. It takes everything that I complimented the original design for and turns it up to 11. The ragged clothing is a sign of the man that once was there, and the fact that the cane is rotted and broken is also a sign of what was once there. But this isn't a man anymore. Not anymore. It's gone. Every trace of a man beneath that skin is gone. He is the Blight now. He is a true full embodiment of the Blight. The plant-like sort of appendages coming from his face, wrapping around his body, the Blight seeping from every nook and cranny of his figure, and his back being this bulbous mass of flesh with the entity's own claws sticking to the sky. It is perfect. It is even better than the base design. If this was his base design, he might just be my favourite original killer in this game. It is not, unfortunately, but this skin is perfect. It is a transformation and adaptation of the Blight, of him at his final evolutionary state. The only thing that could be more blighted was a field of the flowers that he used to create the serum. It is perfect. It is body horror perfection. I love it with all of my heart, as I do this killer. But with that said, we are at the end of the video. I hope you have enjoyed my very, very passionate rambles about the Blight and how much I love him, because he, again, as I said, he is in my top 3 original killers, probably with Plague behind him, and, as I said, someone who shall not be named until their time is to come. Anyways, I hope you have a good evening, afternoon, morning, etc. Like, comment and subscribe if you feel so inclined, and the next video shall be on none other than the twins.